We are under the Lieutenant Governor's office, so I'm an employee of the state. So my background, I have 20 years in the volunteer world. I have recruited volunteers, orientation, curriculum, training, firing, arranging, anything to do with volunteers. And so as you probably already know, volunteers are a mixed bag. You love them, you hate them, you need them, you want to get rid of them, sometimes all of us. So we're going to figure out how to make it work. So our office is devoted entirely to state agencies, counties, nonprofits, churches, schools, anyone in the state of Utah that has a need for volunteerism to help figure out how to train them, manage them, train you, whatever. We are your resource. So I want first and foremost for you to understand that we are a state resource for you, and we don't charge for our services either. So what we offer is we have templates and letters and certificates and trainings that can benefit you or your volunteers. So I leave a stack of business cards here so you know how to get a hold of me. And we do have 2 trainings. Both of them are upcoming, starting in June through the fall. We have one training for anybody that is interested in becoming certified as a volunteer management trainer. So you can learn about volunteer management and then become a certified trainer in that subject. Or we just have a training for volunteer management. You don't want to get this certification course. So if any of that is of interest to you, get my business card, contact me, and let's talk. So these are the biggest nuggets to volunteers. So we're going to start off with recruitment, which is always a difficult, well, not always a difficult process. I'm sure you guys have figured out how to recruit volunteers. The biggest caution I give people is take your time. And you know when your events are and your fairs are, so don't wait for the week before to decide, oh, I need 25 high school students to set up these chairs. If you give yourself more time, and I recognize your jobs, and that's a luxury that you don't often have a lot of spare time. But sometimes we get in the mentality of we just need a warm up. And we're anxious to fill a slot, and that is not a good long-term strategy. Sometimes it's not a good short-term strategy. You need to make sure that you're getting the appropriate person or people or groups for the task or tasks needed. And sometimes if you wait too long, sometimes you can help it wait too long. But when you can, make time so you don't just fill us up with a warm body. And a good way to remember about volunteer recruitment is marketing. You're marketing your job. And so if you're not just talking, so market the actual task that you need done. We need chairs set up. We need, people to take tickets. We need people to balance the books at the end of the day. Whatever it is, so you're marketing a specific task in your recruitment so you can get a better outcome. And then it's win-win. You get the job done that you need help with, uncompensated. And then they are fulfilled because it met their requirements as a volunteer, and then that's going to build longevity for your volunteer program. Now, sometimes there's exceptions to that, and that all of you face that, is when you have a big event and it's just a short term, like when you need a bunch of unskilled volunteers to do something. That's kind of a one-off from this and is handled a bit differently. Because you can do that kind of last minute because it is
A warm body.
sometimes. I guess high school students, you may or may not be able to get them last minute, but in the event you can do that. And then, I don't know if any of you do fundraising for your events either, but this same thing goes with fundraising. It goes with anything, actually. How many times have you been stuck doing something you didn't necessarily want to do but you ended up loving it, or you actually had been thinking for a long time, I'd really like to take my family and do this, or I'd like to get involved in this, but you just don't. And then sometimes someone comes up to you, you know, at the grocery store, at church, at wherever, and starts talking to you and says, Pearl, you know, are you interested in this? We could use some help. And then I end up doing it where I might not have otherwise. So people sometimes get afraid to ask, and that goes with donations as well. You know, don't be afraid to ask. They might say no. They might all say no. You might have to ask 25 people before you get someone to do it. But even in just asking, it lets, you know, it starts the relationship process and lets them know more about you and what you need. And again, it is a not surefire method, but it's a pretty proven method to get people to help you out. By the way, like when Johnny was speaking, if anybody has any comments or questions, just kind of shout them out as we go. I don't want to be so formal as well, we can have a question and answer at the end, but don't wait if you have a question or a comment. I'm not the only one that you guys can learn from. You can probably learn from each other too, so if you have something to add on, please do so. Barriers are a big reason people don't volunteer. So it would be, can you see? Am I standing right in your way? Okay. It might be helpful for you to identify specific to your event, your organization, what your barriers are. It might be, you know, it's out at the fair and it's in a dusty area, and so, you know, that might be a barrier to somebody not wanting to be in the dust all day or in the heat all day, or they have children, or, you know, so that would be barriers specific to that event, and then barriers just in a broader sense of why people don't volunteer. You know, people don't have a lot of disposable time, childcare might be an issue. So the point is, if you identify these barriers, you can mitigate them. And so if you understand that your events are having a hard time getting volunteers because of the heat or something, make sure that you provide, you know, a canopy somewhere for them so they don't need to be out in the 100-degree heat for 8 straight hours, and, you know, water so they can stay hydrated.
I don't know, we can't give them water.
It might be a
I
compensation.
know I was just
Sorry, no water, no shade.
argue that hydration is
Sit out here with no t-shirt. But come and work with us because we're great.
not give you water or shade or even food, but I swear we're going to have a lot of fun. And in talking to people, you might, it's a really good way, just when you are recruiting people or listening to comments from previous volunteers, that might give you clues about barriers for, in general, or specific to your event that you haven't even thought of. So kind of do active listening, and that'll help you, or can help you, come up with some barriers to your event that you might be able to mitigate so that you can get more volunteers and better volunteers. Recruiting volunteers, again, you know, the whole concept, you know, round hole, square peg. When the organization can have their needs met and simultaneously meet the needs of the volunteer, that right there is the nexus, because then that makes you happy, it makes them happy, and it makes them good stewards of your event, which is what you want as well. When you get a volunteer, much like an employee, you don't want them to be second-rate and kind of not really care about what they, you don't want them to have the attitude of, I'm just a volunteer, it doesn't matter if I smile when I greet people when they walk in. Or so, you know, you want to make sure that you have the volunteers that represent you and your event as you want it. And if you go this route, it's not going to happen. So, you know, make sure that you get both of your needs are met. Help that. And recruiting volunteers, you know, how you recruit a 20-year-old, a high school student, or a 60-year-old, probably are going to be a little bit different. The high school student, social media might be your best bet, an older person personally, or maybe in a newsletter, community calendar, something like that might be better avenues. So just recognize one size fits all for recruitment isn't really the best route to take. And then when you're recruiting, again, as many details as you can give. Volunteers are all about managing expectations. I read a blog recently on Twitter, and so it was likely that it was on this person's blog and on Facebook and other places, but it slammed, the whole blog was slamming this organization that she had volunteered for. And she didn't do it, I mean, she was respectful in the way she did it, but still, she did it. Can you imagine if that was your event? And with, social media now, how big that went. So it was all about how she had such a horrible time. And so for me, from my perspective with volunteer management, I read that and thought, what a shame, because all of that was simple. They didn't understand her expectations. They didn't communicate what the volunteer position would be like. So she went in with a completely different mindset than they had, and it just didn't work, and she published it. So there was a lot of comments about that, but that really, I hadn't really thought about how public these things can go until I read that blog. So to manage expectations, give details. You will be standing all day long, you will be answering phones, you will be, you will be able to take time out and enjoy the event, or maybe you'll be able to come back the next day. If you volunteer today, you can have free entrance the next day, or something. So just so expectations are met up front, so that when they get there, then they don't leave thinking, I didn't know I was going to have to stand all day long in one place, or that I couldn't bring my kids, or that I'd have to be reimbursed for lunch, and I didn't bring lunch. I mean, whatever it is, make sure that you communicate the details of what you will be doing at these events. Now, obviously, this is going to vary if it's somebody that's just coming to set up chairs. The level of details that we need to go into is different than somebody that has a bigger job or a more skilled job or a complicated job. But just bear those things in mind. And then techniques to avoid the whole bait and switch. I am sure we have all experienced this. Someone thinks they're coming to volunteer to do this. Now, it's not inconceivable that they were and you had a change of plans and need them to do something else. That is not a problem, and that happens. Just communicate it. I know that you signed up to volunteer to do this, but we really could use your help here. Is that okay? Something like that is a big deal. But if you communicate that you were, that I was going to be at a phone bank answering calls, and I got there, and in addition to answering the phone calls, I had to fill out a form that I didn't understand and go give it to someone who yelled at me, or whatever. Work didn't have anything to do with phones at all. Just be careful of that. And then there's nothing to it. So you could get the message, anybody could do it, or what I've seen happen more often is someone gets there and it's bigger or harder than they think it's going to be, and so they take that on and think, I feel like an idiot, I can't do this, I'm embarrassed, and then it doesn't give them the best experience of you and your event. And the whole, we're desperate. Sometimes that is so common in the volunteer world, and sometimes it actually works if you can do it tongue-in-cheek, but you've got to make sure that you're not insulting about it. And then, not casting the net we talked about, making sure you get the right people. Or making assumptions. Sometimes, it's someone will just assume, again, it goes back to expectations, because you are an accountant, you'll manage the books. And that person might be very comfortable, and that is what they want to do because that's what they know. Or it might be, this is what I do all day long. I don't want to do that. I want to experience this part of it. So don't just make assumptions about what somebody wants to do. Yes, or just, I used to do this and I'm sick and tired of doing it. I've actually heard people do that before. I just need to get a volunteer to do it because I'm tired of doing it. Well, that, I think that speaks for us. So, statement of need. So, I saw something for the Special Olympics recently that actually addressed this really well. So they had a little recruitment message, and again, you could repurpose these messages so that it could work in social media, you could put it in a newsletter, you could post it on the community board and local coffee house, how they have those, or anything. So the same message can be repurposed for different areas, but this one for Special Olympics said, we have gloves, bats, and balls, but no coach. So it was a great declaration of the statement of need. And then, how can a volunteer help? Join Special Olympics baseball team as a coach. Call 1-800, blah, blah, blah. So a great call to action, and then benefits. Sometimes, this one is a little bit of a stretch, but you'll feel appreciated and you'll get exercise. But I thought that was a great example of how to recruit volunteers. And again, how you recruit a volunteer is going to depend on the task. What type of a volunteer you need, how long you need them for, is it a one-day event? Is it a one-day event that you want them to do for the rest of their life? Or maybe you'll never see them again after they volunteer 2 hours at your event, whatever. So just be mindful of those details in recruitment. And then benefits of the position. Some things you could use as your benefits are, you could put it on your resume, you could learn a new skill, you could contribute to your community, you could use it for service learning hours. High school students oftentimes need service learning hours. So if you think of that in terms of number 3 and approaching it more about what problem can I solve for you via my needs for this event? It's a different way to think about it, and you might get some more traction than you would otherwise. And you'd be looked at differently than most organizations because they don't really look at it from that outside perspective. Okay, recruitment. So now we're all experts on recruitment, right? Ready to move on to training? So this doesn't just apply to volunteering. Think about it in your position as well as volunteering. When you have or have not been recognized for what you have done, and how well did that go over. It's really helpful when you can look at, from personal experience and translate that. And that's why I have been a volunteer and still volunteer a lot. And I don't do it for, because I need to know this for my job. I do it because I believe in volunteerism. I believe in community investment. But it certainly does give me a gold mine of how-tos and how-not-tos to apply in my work. And again, it's all about managing expectations of the volunteer. And being trained and being recognized, all of that, and feeling part of the organization. If you want them to connect to your organization, and I don't know why you wouldn't, then training is inevitable. Training checklist. So here's things that you'll want to look over in your training. Now training will depend on tasks. The training for someone that is just coming in to set up the chairs and keep that was a great example. Something like that would be a very different training than a board member or somebody that was helping with the cattle that needed to have specific skills in that area, or riding or something. It would be very different. So your training checklist, the topics will vary based on the types of volunteers. I would also suggest at the trainings, you get contact information. I see this happen time and time again where people forget to get the contact information of the volunteers, and you might want to use them again. You might want to invite them to a recognition event or something, but you didn't get the contact information. So make sure you get the contact information. And then this checklist just is something, things for you to think about that you can apply to your situations that could be helpful. And then topics to include, again, will depend on who you're training. But some of the things that I would include in a training that aren't always included in a training, and you guys have done this enough that it might be a different set here, but breaks. Can I take a break during this? Am I expected to be here all day without a break? Where are the bathrooms? Where, food? How is food handled? And I love that you help. I mean, even not for the sake of it breaking the scary line over there, but that also just ties organizations together better to deepen relationships. So that was a great approach to that. So just make sure you include all of this type of information in your training, and who do they need to speak to if there is a problem or a question. Because that's, especially at the type of events you do, conceivably that could happen quite a bit. And if a volunteer is standing there with somebody that has been hurt or irate or any number of situations, the volunteer has no idea who to approach, it could compound a bad situation. So just make sure that you include something like that into your training. Now, training, if it is someone that you want to be, a board member or something at a more executive level, that training would be a whole different training than event training. Now, and there's two styles of training, the formal and the informal. Day of events can be, I've seen that happen a lot, and it's very effective, where, you say to somebody, there's an organization locally that I'm very invested with, and they ask me, Whole Foods, I don't know if you guys are aware of that, occasionally Whole Foods has these days where they invite nonprofits to come in and you can set up your table there, and a portion of the proceeds from that day are donated to that organization. So as a volunteer, I was asked to come and sit at that table at Whole Foods for a few hours. That was easy. They just said, come 10, 15 minutes early so we can just chat. Or sometimes if it's a bigger event, get people there. Everybody, all volunteers, come over here to this corner for a minute, we're going to talk. So that's a very effective way sometimes to have trainings, group trainings. Sometimes a one-on-one training is better, especially if say it's a volunteer, which would obviously be somebody that you trusted and knew. Say it was a volunteer was going to be the person, the go-to person for problems or questions. That would be more of a one-on-one, because that wouldn't apply to everybody else. Classroom style might be better suited if you really wanted to go in depth or have a more skill set type of training, but you know what you need to do. And either one of those approaches are fine, it's just a matter of what works best for you. One thing that I would say on trainings, people forget to talk about their mission or their bigger purpose in trainings too. You get so focused on, I'm training for this fair, the rodeo, gala, whatever, that you forget you've got an audience there that you can share a bit more about your bigger picture, because that helps educate them more, maybe make them feel more invested and involved. And why would you not want to communicate your bigger picture to them. Keeping all volunteers updated, that is a good one, because things happen, especially in fairs and rodeos and that type of things change, timelines change, locations change, and you cannot forget to tell your volunteers about that, because then we'll go back to the slide, few slides ago about, volunteer training and experience. Oh man, that's very, I was in a gala once where they had the silent auction. I was just standing there as a guest, watching this take place where whoever was in charge of the event had decided to shut the silent auction down earlier than was posted and what the volunteers had been told, but they had forgotten to tell the volunteers that. So the volunteers are standing there managing the table, and it's their job to make sure that someone doesn't steal the things or, hide the sign-up sheet so nobody else can bid on it or whatever. And they came by and started just grabbing the bid sheets. And the volunteers, not knowing that even that was a staff member or what was going on, completely freaked out, justifiably so. And it was a very awkward exchange that caught the attention of a lot of the guests. Did it ruin the night for anybody? No. But did it, could it have been handled better, and could that volunteer have felt a little bit more in the loop and a little bit more respected by having that communicated? So just remember things like that. And that your volunteers talk, going back to the blog. What you want to have happen is someone to write a blog about, I had the best experience at this event next year. I want all of you to come volunteer with me and attend this event. That's the type of communication you want, but make no mistake, people will communicate about their experiences, good or bad. And then evaluation. Now, evaluation, again, is going to depend on the person or the training. Evaluation can be as simple as a conversation or a question. Do you cover everything you need? Are you clear on what you need? Do you have any questions? Do you have any feedback for me? Something like that could be very helpful. Make sure you make a mental note or write that down. You could send out a survey monkey after your event to get a better feel for how it went, ideas you could go with. You could, with the t-shirt that they are given to wear, not as a compensation, but as a requirement. They could be handed a written survey to say, hand this in before you leave, or mail it back or something, or even, like I said, just the conversation. Because if you can catch events early, I've seen this happen too, where someone had a horrible experience for a whole host of reasons that left unhandled would have resulted into the first blog kind of a scenario. But someone, a staff member, came up and asked them, didn't even know it was a problem, but asked them, how did it go? Do you have any feedback for me? Well, in the course of that dialogue, found out that there were some pretty horrific misunderstandings about the events and how things would be handled that the staff member then worked through. I mean, couldn't solve all of them because the proverbial milk had been spilled, but spent time with that volunteer and worked it through and ended up salvaging that relationship and that volunteer. And that's kind of a joke between the two of them now. Remember the first time I volunteered? And they're a long-time volunteer now. So things like that can happen, and it can be as quick and easy and simple as just a conversation at the time. You guys are also quiet. You were so verbal with Johnny.
You made us talk during our lunch.
Is that it? Or is the food coming out and rather than napping and things? So volunteer recognition would be looked at, here's where we're going to really make sure that we're creative, that we are appropriate, and that we're proactive. But volunteer recognition could be looked at as a task, a to-do, but I like to look at it more as an attitude or a philosophy. So you kind of just approach it from that instead of at the end of the event, we got the chairs set up, and we got the tickets taken, and they want money, and people have fun, and now we have to recognize the volunteers. Don't, take it out of that task list kind of thing and make it more of a philosophy, just a part of who you are and what you do. And then it makes it kind of easier to do it in organic ways as well, instead of just a structured event. And make sure, so have a thought about when do you want to recognize volunteers? And there's no right or wrong answer. It entirely depends on you and your volunteers and how it works for you. Do you want to recognize them at the time that they volunteer? When they leave the organization? Let's say they've been a long time volunteer. When they leave the organization, do you want to recognize them at a luncheon later? All of the above? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, and I don't think you can thank people enough. But just have those thoughts in mind, and then marry those thoughts with this chart here, so nobody gets in trouble. And then going back to a time in your own life when you, and again as a volunteer or as a person, what was it like? How meaningful was it? Did you appreciate the recognition? Was it trite? Did it feel like a script? Was it personalized? What do you want your volunteers to feel like? What do you want at the end of the day from your volunteers? Do you want more than just they came and they helped with the event? Do you want them to be, like I said, lifelong volunteers? Do you want them to now volunteer or help out with other capacities in your organization? What are your goals for your volunteers? So once you know that touches on, the training, the recognition, the recruit, all of those areas, goals. We all have goals. We all have our strategic plans, our performance reviews, where we're all measured on our goals. So it's not unrealistic that you have goals for your volunteers as well. Now, organizational barriers to recognition. Sometimes people just say, and I use the word say, they don't have time because you have to nobody has time. We all make time. We choose to spend our time in certain ways. Competition among volunteers for recognition. That can happen. That goes back to the whole bag of goodies with volunteers and all the things that come when you have volunteers. Or paid staff not feeling recognized. So some ways that you could, again, mitigate the bullet number 3 there, is you can have a luncheon after the event, the time distance there, to recognize staff and volunteers. And don't make events boring. Volunteer events tend to be, I'm sure yours aren't. But I've been to many boring volunteer events where it feels very scripted and not fun. But I've also been to some where it was fun, and it was a party, and you could recognize volunteers for a whole host of things. You could recognize them for the actual work tasks that they did, or recognize them for helping contribute to the event, made this much money, had this many attendees, something on a larger level. You could say, everybody stand up who knows the mission of our organization. Stand up if you had to search for more than 10 minutes for parking this morning. If you knew the executive director or whoever before today's event. So you can throw other elements in there to make it make it more fun, and again, go back to incorporating a little bit of information about your events, your purpose, your mission. Never shy away from an opportunity to educate an audience, but just do it in a fun way. And then I have seen people, when there's competition for volunteers, you could do it, have the volunteers vote on it, or have different levels, randomized study, T-evaluation kind of thing. However you want to do it. There is no right or wrong way. I'd say the wrong way is to not do it, but outside of that. But a couple of things that we can offer that I did not have in January when I was there, but an actual copy of the certificate. Our office has these certificates available for recognition. As I said, we are under the under the direction of the Lieutenant Governor. So these are signed by the Lieutenant Governor. So they're kind of a cool award. We ask that they not be given out to just, that it be more for more substantive volunteering. That doesn't mean it can't be for a day of event, but the caliber of it is such that we like it to be for some, for a greater purpose. Am I articulating this at all? And you can just contact me. It was someone that was at the conference in January when I talked about this without having the sample of it, because it is kind of cool, isn't it? That is pretty. They contacted me after, and here's how they did it. I love the creative part of it. So we had a conversation. He called and talked about, here's what I'm looking for, here's what we're going to do. So what we ended up doing, it was a local bank that had volunteered, had sent like 20 employees to volunteer for the whole planning process. Now, not all 20 volunteers were involved for the whole way, but the 20 volunteers, some were in the planning process for months and months, some were day of, some were, week of, but they had a significant number of employees, so he asked that the certificate be made out to the bank instead of to the employees. That's something that the bank could put on his wall, and he said, and I have an ulterior motive, and that's because I want a donation. Not only did they volunteer and did an outstanding job, but I also want to go back next year and ask them to be a sponsor of this event, and recognizing someone like that can certainly help that way. I was like, I had not even thought of that, and I thought, what a fabulous idea. So that's exactly what we ended up doing. So again, take my business card, contact me if you would like these. It is a really nice way to recognize volunteers. There's also, I talked also about the Utah Philanthropy Day, where they have a Heart and Hands Award. Anyone can recognize a volunteer, and they get a little certificate that says Heart and Hands, and get entered into the program. If you are interested in coming to Salt Lake for that. If not, there are other organizations throughout the state that do things like that, but those are great ways to recognize volunteers. And free, we don't charge for these, so you want to do this really fun. So awards are more tangible things. The certificates, pins, all of that type of stuff. And events work really well for social volunteers. If you want people to have a more bonding kind of an experience with each other, with your staff, whatever, that's a great way. I have one of the, don't ever underestimate the power of socializing and networking. Because oftentimes that is one of the motivations why people volunteer. I have a training, one of the trainings that I mentioned, the certificate training for volunteer management coming up at the end of this month. And one of the attendees emailed me and asked, will there be time for networking? And I thought, oh, I love that someone is thinking along those lines. And it's a good reminder that that's pretty integral to the volunteer process for a lot of people. Not for everybody, but for some people. And again, I would just counsel you to make sure that when you're doing this, you read your statute so that you don't overstep the line, because that, I doubt that happens very often, thankfully, but it only takes once for it to be just a bad road altogether.
Can I ask a question? Wonder if we do compensate or give some of these things to our volunteers, could they, and then it puts them back over to a personal where they could be sued, could we have them sign a waiver or a release that if anything happens while they're volunteering, because they would be covered? Or that they couldn't be sued, or they couldn't sue us?
I don't think so, again, because the way that the legislature has set it up for public agencies, for counties, is unlike any other organization. Another organization can have people volunteer for them. They don't need to go through any process. They're just a volunteer for their organization. But for a county or other public agency, the statute says they cannot provide any service. A person may not provide a service to unless they've been approved as a volunteer. So you can't have somebody that volunteers their time and effort to the county without going through that process. That you absolutely have to do it. The legislature wants you to protect those people as volunteers. So there's no other way to try and do it through agreements or waivers or anything like that. You want to go through the process in the statute. And at the end of the day, the issue with were they compensated or not is a secondary issue. I think a lot of you are taking it more to heart. And I'm glad I scared you. but don't completely change the way that you recruit and keep volunteers. The important thing is finding volunteers to do the work. Be mindful of when you start really giving them a lot, have you crossed that line? Again, a meal ticket, a t-shirt, a pin, things like that. I think we're going to be able to show a judge that that is not compensation. It shouldn't subvert this entire statute where clearly the legislature wants the county to defend that person. But you start saying the only way we can get volunteers is to pay them $2 an hour. Now it's going to be really hard for us to say that that meets the letter of the statute. So worry about Pearl's things first. Get your volunteers. Worry about my issues with compensation secondary.
Well, the trainings that I mentioned, if you contact me, I can give you information on. They go more in depth into motivations. And if you know the motivations of volunteers, you can avoid all that because you really don't want a volunteer that does. You don't want somebody there that is only there because you're paying them more or because of the ancillary tangible items. That's probably not the best agent for your events and for your organization anyway. So I do have more information on how to identify motivations and other components of volunteerism that if you contact me, we can go over. But it is imperative that you recognize your volunteers. I mean, you can't not recognize a volunteer. We all have busy lives, and we all have a list of things we can do with our spare time. So when someone is willing to come and volunteer, we are very lucky to live in Utah because